Darkness flickered instead of settling. Lantern light trembled across broken glass. A man knelt in the middle of the road, his hands shaking as he tried to tie a bandage that wouldn't stay tight. Another explosion rolled across the distance. Not close, but coming closer. Someone shouted, "They're turning back." No one moved, because moving meant leaving the wounded behind. The road was no longer a road. It was a hospital. Stretchers made from doors. Blankets spread over cold pavement. People lying in rows between burning debris. And along the center of it all, a line of oil lanterns. Too bright, too visible, too exposed. From the air, it must have looked like a signal. A glowing path in the darkness. One medic looked up and whispered, "They can see us." Engines grew louder. Shadows crossed the light. The bombers were overhead again. No shelters. No trenches. No buildings left standing. Only prisoners working in the open. Waiting. The aircraft passed. Seconds stretched. No bombs fell. They kept working. But later, investigators would ask a question that still has no clear answer. Did the pilots choose not to strike? Or did they never see the lanterns at all? The events took place during the final year of the war. By that time, supply systems were collapsing. Cities were overcrowded with refugees. Transportation routes were damaged or constantly under threat. Night bombing had become routine. Targets were rail lines, storage depots, and road junctions. But accuracy at night was never perfect. Entire neighborhoods could be hit by mistake. And once sirens sounded, movement stopped. No trains. No convoys. No evacuation. If you were caught outside during a night raid, you stayed where you were. That rule mattered, because near the edge of the city was a temporary POW compound. It held captured German medical personnel. Doctors, orderlies, nurses. They were considered low-risk prisoners. Their work inside the camp focused on treating other detainees. They were not allowed outside the fence, not even during emergencies. The guards followed strict protocol. No exceptions. But in the days before the raid, something unusual had been happening. The number of civilian casualties arriving at nearby clinics was increasing. The city's main hospital had already taken damage, and supply trucks were arriving less often. One guard later reported hearing a quiet conversation between two officers. "If the hospital goes down, there's nowhere left." At the time, no one thought it would matter. Until the sirens began that night. And didn't stop. Inside the compound, daily life followed a strict routine. Wake at first light. Roll call. Assigned duties. Most of the German prisoners had medical backgrounds. Some had worked in military field hospitals. Others had been civilian doctors before the war. One of them, a surgeon in his early 40s, had been captured months earlier. He rarely spoke, but he kept his tools clean, even though he rarely used them. Another prisoner had been a nurse. She kept careful notes about injuries inside the camp, even minor ones, because she believed order mattered, especially in uncertainty. The guards watched them closely, but over time, something unexpected developed. Professional respect. They followed instructions. They didn't cause trouble. And when illness spread through the camp one winter, the prisoners helped contain it. Still, the rules never changed. The gate remained closed. Always. Until the night the bombing began. When the first explosions hit the industrial district, the ground shook inside the compound. Lights went out. Then came a message from the city. Casualties were overwhelming local responders. The nearest functioning medical facility had just been destroyed. For several minutes, the guards argued. Then someone unlocked the gate. But no one knew if they would be allowed back in. The prisoners moved quickly. But the closer they got to the main road, the worse the damage became. Buildings burned. Power lines lay across the street. People were walking without direction. Some were silent. Some were shouting names. Then the bombers came back. The second wave. Everyone scattered. The prisoners pressed against a stone wall and waited. After the explosions stopped, they reached the road. And stopped. Because there was no medical station. No organized response. Only wounded civilians lying wherever they had fallen. For a moment, no one gave orders. Then the surgeon spoke. "We work here." Blankets were spread on the pavement. Wood from broken carts became splints. Someone found a damaged supply crate. Bandages inside. Not enough. And then the problem became clear. There was no light. Night operations were impossible. Until someone brought lanterns and placed them in a straight line down the road. One by one. Two visible. But without them, the wounded would die. The work began. Vast. Quiet. Focused. Wounds were cleaned using water from a leaking fire tank. Bandages reused when supplies ran out. Every few minutes, someone looked up. Listening. Waiting for the engines. When the bombers returned, the sound came from the west. Closer than before. The lantern flames shook in the wind. Some guards shouted to turn them off. But the surgeon refused. "If we lose the light, we lose them." The aircraft passed overhead. Everyone froze. Seconds. Then silence. No impact. They kept working. Mori prisoners arrived from the camp. Volunteers. No one had ordered them. One guard later wrote. They moved toward the danger, not away from it. Then something else happened. A transport truck tried to leave the area. But the road ahead had been hit. Escape was impossible. The bombing had blocked every exit route. Everyone was trapped. Working. Waiting. Under the lanterns. By morning, military authorities arrived. They expected chaos. Instead, they found organized treatment lines. Records written on scraps of paper. Patients grouped by condition. The prisoners were still working. Despite exhaustion. Despite no sleep. Officials began asking questions. Who authorized the gate opening? No clear answer. Why were lanterns placed in a straight line? No clear answer. Why didn't the bombers attack the illuminated road? No clear answer. Flight logs showed aircraft passed overhead. More than once. Investigators marked the location on a map. It should have been visible, which led to an uncomfortable possibility. Either the pilots saw the lights, or they didn't, and both explanations raised concerns. In the days that followed, the questions began. At first, they were practical. Who ordered the gate opened? Who authorized prisoners to leave the compound? Why were lanterns placed in a straight line along the road? But one question overshadowed all the others. Why didn't the bombers strike? Because flight records confirmed something unsettling. Aircraft had passed directly over the area. More than once. At operational altitude, the crews would have seen the glow. A narrow band of light. Steady. Unbroken. Too organized to be accidental. From above, it would not have looked like random fires. It would have looked deliberate, visible, and exposed. Yet no bombs fell. No secondary strike. No strafing. No adjustment of target. Nothing. The aircraft simply passed. And the silence that followed became the beginning of the mystery. The first explanation was the simplest. The crews never saw the lanterns. Night bombing, especially during the later years of the war, depended heavily on altitude and speed. Pilots were often flying at several thousand meters. At that height, visibility was limited. Smoke from earlier strikes could obscure entire districts. Cloud layers could distort ground light. Fires burned everywhere during raids. Industrial targets, warehouses, residential areas, street lamps damaged but still flickering. Small points of light might blend into the background. Investigators reviewed weather reports from that night. There had been smoke, low drifting clouds, wind shifting direction. Under those conditions, a line of lanterns might not stand out. But there was a problem with that explanation. Nearby targets had been hit accurately. Rail lines, a storage yard, a vehicle depot, all within the same operational window. If crews could identify those targets, how could they miss a continuous line of light running through open roadway? And there was something else. The lanterns were not scattered. They were arranged, evenly spaced, a straight path. From the air, patterns mattered. Pilots were trained to recognize patterns, which meant the question remained. Did they really not see it? Or did they see something and decide it wasn't a target? Military planners often assigned specific zones for bombing. If the lantern road lay outside the designated target grid, crews might have ignored it. Their instructions were clear. Do not waste ordnance. Do not improvise targets. Do not engage unless ordered. Investigators examined the strike maps. The intended targets were industrial facilities several kilometers away. The lantern road sat near the edge of the operational boundary, technically outside. That could explain the lack of attack. But again, the records raised doubts. Some bombs had fallen outside the primary zone that same night. Navigation errors were common. Wind drift, anti-aircraft evasive maneuvers, crew fatigue. If bombs could land off-target elsewhere, why not here? And if the lanterns were visible, would a crew really ignore such a clear ground feature? Especially during a night mission where visual confirmation was rare. The theory explained procedure, but it didn't explain human behavior. Because combat decisions were rarely mechanical. They were made in seconds, under pressure, by people. And that led to the third theory. From altitude, interpretation could be dangerous. A straight line of light could resemble many things. A convoy, a supply route, a military movement, or even a decoy. During the war, deception tactics were common. False lighting patterns, dummy installations, simulated activity to draw fire away from real targets. Some analysts suggested the crews may have suspected a trap. An illuminated path could signal anti-aircraft concentration, or an attempt to lure low-altitude attack. If uncertainty existed, Standard procedure was caution. Continue the mission. Do not engage unknown ground formations. But this explanation also raised problems. There were no anti-aircraft batteries near the road. No military vehicles. No defensive activity. Only wounded civilians and unarmed medical personnel. From the ground, the scene had been quiet. Almost still. From the air, movement would have been minimal, which meant the crews would have seen light. But very little motion. Not a convoy. Not a unit. Not an active installation. Just illumination. And that brought investigators to a more difficult possibility. One that never appeared in official summaries. But it appeared in private correspondence. In post-war interviews. In quiet recollections from aircrew years later. Night missions were not completely blind. Crews sometimes descended slightly when searching for confirmation. Navigators and bombardiers often scanned visually before release. If the lantern road was seen clearly, it might have looked different than a military target. No vehicles, no defensive fire, no structured installation, just a narrow band of light. And shapes along it. Rose. Still. Too still. One retired crew member, interviewed decades later about night operations in general, described a moment of hesitation during a different mission. If something didn't look like a target, you paused. You checked again. Sometimes that pause was enough to move on. There is no proof that such a moment happened over the Lantern Road. No pilot ever reported it. No mission log mentioned it. But investigators noticed something unusual in the flight timing. Aircraft crossed the area, then shifted course slightly earlier than expected. A minor deviation, within normal limits, but enough to avoid the illuminated path. Coincidence or decision? No one could say. Attempts to confirm any of the theories ran into a larger problem. Documentation gaps. Several operational reports from that week were incomplete. Some pages missing. Others damaged. Crew debrief summaries focused only on primary targets. Anything outside the assigned zone was rarely recorded, which meant even if someone noticed the Lantern Road, there was no requirement to mention it. Years later, historians searched unit archives, personnel diaries, private letters. Nothing described a glowing road. Nothing mentioned a medical line. Nothing confirmed visual contact. The event existed only from the ground perspective, seen by those under the lights, not by those above them. And that imbalance created uncertainty, because absence of evidence could mean two things. It never happened, or it happened, and no one wrote it down. What made the mystery deeper was the lack of attention after the war. No formal investigation followed. No international inquiry. No military review. The event was considered too small, too localized. One night, one road, no strategic significance. The prisoners involved were transferred. The guards reassigned. The civilians dispersed. Memories scattered. And without documentation, the story survived only through personal accounts. Several survivors later described the same moment. Engines overhead. Lantern light reflecting upward. Everyone freezing. Waiting for impact. But none came. One civilian recalled looking up and thinking, "They must see us." Another said, "I kept expecting the lights to go out from the blast. But the lights stayed on." and the aircraft continued past. There was one final theory, rarely discussed, never confirmed: war fatigue. By the final year, many aircrews had flown dozens of missions. Night after night, loss rates were high, stress constant. Decision-making under exhaustion could change behavior. Some historians suggest that late-war crews became more selective. Not officially, not consciously, but instinctively. If something didn't clearly match a target, they moved on, preserving fuel, preserving time, preserving distance from anti-aircraft zones. If the Lantern Road did not resemble an objective, it might simply have been ignored. Not out of mercy, not out of recognition, but out of operational habit. A small decision, made in seconds, with no awareness of what was happening below. Investigators eventually summarized the situation in simple terms. Aircraft were present. The illuminated road was visible from the ground. No attack occurred. Beyond that, certainty ended. There is no confirmation the crews saw the lights. No confirmation they did not. No evidence of intentional avoidance. No evidence of accidental oversight. Only possibilities. Only interpretation. Only silence in the records. And that silence remains the most revealing detail of all. Because in war, almost everything is documented. Targets, damage, losses, coordinates, times. But sometimes, the absence of a decision leaves no trace. And sometimes, the most important moment is the one no one wrote down. Which explanation is most likely? Poor visibility, operational boundaries, misidentification, fatigue, or a deliberate decision made by someone looking down through the darkness? There is no final answer, no recovered report, no witness from the cockpit, only the memory of those on the road, and the fact that the lanterns burned all night, untouched, unstruck, unnoticed, or perhaps sane and spared. The road was cleared within days. Debris removed. Traffic restored. The lanterns disappeared. The temporary hospital never existed on any official map. The prisoners were returned to the compound, later transferred. The guards reassigned. No monument was built. No plaque installed. But years later, survivors described the same memory. A long road, dark sky, and a line of lights stretching into the distance, with prisoners working beside civilians. No uniforms that mattered. No sides. No enemies. Just people trying to keep others alive. And one question that still remains: when the bombers passed overhead, did someone see the lanterns and choose not to strike?